Hello friends, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the February breakdown of everything I read. I have got some super good books to share with you. I cannot wait. But first, if you're new here, welcome. My name's Maile and we do lots of fun things on this channel, book content like this. Every month I break down all the books I read that month. But we also do shopping videos, grocery hauls, DIY around the house type projects and cleaning, theater content, vlogs of our daily life and travel, all kinds of fun things. So if any of that sounds good to you and you aren't subscribed yet, click that red subscribe button and help us toward our goal of hitting 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. Okay, spiel over. Let's freaking dive in, because if you watched my January book video, I started the year out extremely strong with only 4 and 5-star reads. And let me just tell you, by some miracle, the streak is continuing, okay? I have such good books to tell you about. And I talked a little bit about this in the January video, but I think I've just gotten really good at curating the kind of books that I know I will like, only reading those. And if I start to not like a book, I just DNF it. So I do have a couple of DNFs this month to tell you about as well that I started but did not finish. So let's jump right in with the first book that I read in February. This book I read for book club. I'm in a book club at work. For February, we picked a book that celebrated Black History since it was Black History Month. And oh my gosh, we read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This book was one of those like life changers. It's the kind of story that blows your mind as you're reading it because it's true history, something that was incredibly profound to the world that I just knew nothing about. Absolutely nothing about. So it blows your mind the whole time you're reading it, because how could you never have learned this? You know, it was that kind of book, and it's the kind of book that totally sticks with you. I am still thinking about this book all the time. Like this, oh my gosh, it's just so incredible. So it's the story of Henrietta Lacks, who was a real Black woman in the 1950s. She was a mother. She was suffering from cancer. She was in and out of a very world-renowned medical center, Hopkins, getting treatment for her cancer. She came from a poor Black family, was married, had I think 4 or 5 kids, I can't remember. And essentially during her insane treatment, which they document in this, it was back when they used radium and like sewed it into oh my gosh, I can't even. It was grueling, the cancer treatment that she went through at that time, which I thought was a whole, could have been a whole book in and of itself to talk about that. But her cells were taken without her consent and used to basically grow, I think, the first immortal cells. So the first cells that actually were able to grow and are still being used today in science all around the world. Like, her name is Henrietta Lacks, but they didn't publish her name. They call the cells HeLa cells. And truly, they're used by scientists every single day. They helped lead to like the discovery of the polio vaccine, a lot of like vital medical research on genes and cloning. It helps lead to a bunch of discoveries in like women's health with like PCOS, and just HeLa cells are probably the single greatest cells to ever be used in the medical world, okay? And her consent was not given. They were taken from her without her consent, without her true knowledge or understanding. And the author totally details all that, of course, but also the impact of her death and the use of her cells on her family generations after she dies. And it's just an incredible look at Black culture, the economic divide, profound effects of poverty generationally. I mean, it was just such a complex book. You get to know this family. Her daughter is a very prevalent character. There's lots of mental health issues in the family. Like, it's just an incredibly profound story. Maybe the best book I've read so far this year. I absolutely adored it. It was an easy 5 stars. Everyone should read this book. Okay, next I read the book James, which was also so incredible. So I think James like won a bunch of awards. In fact, did it win a Pulitzer Prize last year? I don't remember, but it's a very critically acclaimed book, very, very popular. My dad read it and he was like, you've got to read this book. This book was incredible. So it's a retelling of Huck Finn from the perspective of James, the slave. And oh my gosh, it has an element, I don't want to ruin it, so I won't talk about it. I don't want to spoil it, but it has also an element that kind of blew my mind, an element of real history about the slave experience that I knew nothing about, that this book taught me about, and totally blew my mind. It was so incredibly good. Another one of those books that just feels so important as you're reading it. It totally sticks with you. It makes you think. It teaches you new things. and it keeps your interest too. And it's not, I know how like some books that are retellings or a perspective change on a story you already know can be kind of like monotonous to get through because you already know the story. But I'm telling you, you don't know this story. Like, it is so good. I have read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, but I wouldn't say I like could tell you every story beat of it. So you don't need to know like in detail Huck Finn before you read this either. I think you can get something out of it. Even if you know nothing about Huck Finn, it's its own, very much its own singular story. It's an incredible book that, again, everyone should read. I gave it 5 stars. I know. We're starting out so strong. Okay, let me talk about a DNF because I started to read another book next and I ended up not loving it. So I started to read Under the Dome by Stephen King, which is about a town that one day this giant, literal, invisible dome covers the town and traps everyone inside, and what chaos ensues from there. So I was super excited to read this book, very hyped up. I really love Stephen King's writing. I don't read a lot of his books because they're pretty scary and I'm a big old scaredy cat, but this one sounded super interesting to me, right up my alley and not too scary. So I got maybe 4 or 5% in. It's like over 1,000 pages. So I probably got 100 pages in and I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm telling you, the chapters, and maybe you'll like this, and I'm sure that there's an end to it soon, but I just couldn't, it was just driving me nuts, and I just couldn't keep reading the same chapter over and over again, which I felt was happening, because there are short, choppy chapters that all kind of happen at the same time as the dome is poofing into existence, where you just are following people close to the border, people right under the dome, getting killed. Like, it's literally like this plane is flying, then all of a sudden out of nowhere they're hit, they go down, their heads get severed, and there's blood everywhere. Like, it was just chapter after chapter after chapter after chapter detailing the people that were too close to the dome when it hit, how they died, pretty much. It was bloody, it was gory. I didn't like it. I felt like I don't know these people, like this is not, there's no connection here. Like, I need to just know that people died when the dome came into existence, and that's all I really need to know. Let's get to the real story, you know? But I just was like, I can't read another chapter about somebody's bloody arm being severed, you know? So it wasn't for me. I didn't like it. I DNF'd it. Okay, so the next book I read was a book called Summer Romance by Abigail Monahan, I think is the author. Oh my gosh. I've heard that she's a really good romance author. I just had never picked up one of her books before, but my favorite booktuber, Destiny Sidwell, read it and was like, it's the best book I read all year. And I was like, well, then I gotta read it based on that recommendation. So it's basically a story about a mom in her 40s who's going through a divorce. She has 2 kids. She's in this like small town just trying to exist and start her life again. And the younger brother of one of her besties comes into town to visit, and they kind of instantly have sparks, but then the relationship becomes complicated for like really real and legit reasons. And it just felt like a very real to life couple. It didn't feel like cheesy romancy over the top, and it didn't feel like the conflict was a third act conflict because there has to be one in a romance outline and it was stupid and made no sense. Like, it just didn't flow like normal romance books flow, which is why I don't read a lot of romance books anymore, because it's just all the same formula. This book felt very different. It felt very unique in the way it told its story and the character development. I just really loved the realness of this story of watching this mom in her 40s, like, obviously prioritize her kids over everything and navigate like coming into her own after being super passive in her marriage for years, and how that affected her, and her like learning to live life again how she wants to in her own terms. Like, it was, the romance was very prevalent, but it was just so much more than that. The characters were deeper and it explored more interesting themes than just love. And I really, really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 5 stars too. I'm telling you, you guys, it's been a good reading year so far, okay? Okay, then I read another romance. I know, 2 romances in 1 month is actually a lot for me. It's called Just Last Night, and it's by Mari McFarlane, who in January's video, if you saw that video, I read one of her books for the first time and just absolutely loved it and thought, I'm gonna pick up another one of her books and read it, which I really loved this one too. I don't think I loved it as much as I loved the first book I read by her, but I still really, really enjoyed it. It's about a group of 4 friends who are super close. One of the friends has been in love with the other one for years and years and years, but it's never really worked out between them, even though there's some history there. And it's not really a spoiler because it's kind of the inciting incident. One of the 4 friends dies very unexpectedly, and they have to deal with all the fallout from her death. She wasn't really close to her family. She had a weird relationship with her brother who comes into town to manage her funeral and all the unexpected death stuff that happens, and the friends have to deal with the brother. And the reason I really love this author is because she just writes in a very British way. It's very dry humor, it's quirky characters, but there's also like heart to it, and it doesn't follow that formulaic romance outline that I really hate. Like, it's the kind of book that you don't really know what's going to happen romance-wise until pretty much till the end. And there's so much more in the book to explore. Like, the themes of friendship were super prevalent, grief, complications with things you find out about your loved one after they've passed, and how that like changes your view of them and kind of rocks your world. Like, there's so many layers to this book that I absolutely loved, while still, you know, being a fun, silly kind of romance. And I just like that more complexity to the story in a romance, especially because I'm just so sick of the same old, same old. So I really love her books. This one I think I gave 4 stars. The next book I read was a book called Unspeakable. And it was written by Jessica Willis of the Willis clan. They're a family of like 12 kids-ish, 11, 10, an insane number of children in a family, super Christian conservative family, homeschooled. They all grew up playing music, doing like river dance. They had, I think, a show on TLC. They were on America's Got Talent because they were a family band. And the oldest sister, this is her memoir of what it was like growing up. And unfortunately, their father was secretly completely physically and sexually abusive toward them, and is now in jail for the rest of his life. I read a lot of memoirs. Memoirs, honestly, might be my favorite genre. I know that's weird, but I love memoirs because I just like people's stories. I like true life, real stories. I think that's why I'm so obsessed with like Mormon culture, because it's just so interesting and fascinating to me to learn about how people live and how that's totally different from me. And hers was probably one of the most harrowing memoirs I've read. I've read another book called What My Bones Know that was also extremely harrowing and hard to read, but man, hers was detailed, okay? And that's all I'm really gonna say. Be forewarned, it is not for the faint of heart. Be in a really good headspace before you read it, but I think it is such an important story to be told, and people should absolutely read it if you feel, you know, equipped enough to do that. It was an easy 5 stars. She is such a good writer. Oh my gosh, she is such a good writer. She told her story so bravely, so detailed, and wow, just, it was harrowing to read, but very important to read, and I thought it was incredibly well done. So good for her. Then another DNF I read, which was extremely surprising to me, because I say, and maybe this is changing, I don't know, but I say my favorite romance author is Ali Hazelwood. I love the vast majority of her books, okay? There's only one of her books so far that I've read and just straight up did not like. I think it's called like Not in Love or something. I finished it, but I barely finished it. I think I gave it 2 stars. I did not like it at all. All her other books, if I haven't given them 5 stars, I've given them very close to 5 stars. And she's been branching out and writing different kinds of books, and those are the ones that I don't like as much as her like normal, very formulaic actually, STEMinist style romance novels, okay? This book that just came out, her newest release called Deep End, explores some different themes, and I was a little skeptical about it. And I'll tell you, I was right to be skeptical. At least for myself. Like, I'm not saying it was badly written or people shouldn't read it or it was a bad book. It just simply wasn't for me. It's about a college diving athlete and a relationship she strikes up with her best friend's ex-boyfriend-ish. I don't know. Honestly, I only got maybe 30 or 40 pages in, and it was very clear to me that this is not the kind of book I want to be reading. So it just wasn't for me. I DNF'd it. That's not to say Ali Hazelwood's writing is bad or you shouldn't read it. I just didn't love it and I DNF'd it. Okay, so last book I read in February was such a good one. It's another, I have physical copy of it. Can you guys believe I have 2 physical copies from the month? I always read on my Kindle or listen to the audiobook, so I really don't read a lot of physical books anymore, but I am part of Book of the Month, which LOL, that sounds like a sponsorship. My channel is way too tiny to be sponsored, especially by someone as awesome as Book of the Month. But I do get Book of the Month, and this was my pick this month, and it's a book called Good Dirt. It just came out, it's a new release, and oh my gosh, this is such a good book, you guys. It's about a very affluent Black family who has deep roots and history in the community where they live, and they have a handmade giant jug that dates back to their ancestors who were in slavery, made by an artist who was enslaved, and it's followed their family for generations and generations and generations. And the inciting incident of the book is the brother of the family, when he's 15 years old, is in the house with his 10-year-old sister, who the book is primarily from her perspective. And 2 men come in and they kill the brother, and the jug falls and shatters. It basically follows the sister and her life after, how she copes with that, how it still affects her life and her relationships into her adulthood. It also shows the history of her family, her parents growing up. It shows way back to their roots of their ancestors who were slaves. It tells their story. It kind of highlights the jug and how it was created and all the people during that time. And it's just such a beautiful story of family, story of generations and deep roots. It's the kind of book that every chapter is from a different perspective, which I love. It jumps timelines all over the place, which I love. It reminded me of the way one of my favorite authors, Kate Morton, who hasn't written a new book in a while, how she writes her stories. It focuses on the same couple of families throughout a big chunk of time and from each different perspective, and it's just kind of all over the place until the story culminates at the end in a nice big puzzle piece that's put together. And I just love those kind of stories. They move so beautifully. Things are hinted at in the beginning that are revealed in the end, and it just is such a beautiful map. It's just such a beautiful map of this family's history. It felt very real to me. It's a fiction book, but it felt like it could have been a real family, and I absolutely adored it. It was so, so, so good. So 5 stars once again. I know, it's crazy. Maybe we can keep the streak going in March, but so far it's been an amazing reading year, and that's everything I read in February. So thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.